Hi, welcome to Real People. I'm Stephanie Allensworth. Today we're back with my friend Kat Thompson, and we are going to do a deep dive into grief. Kat, I know you've been through some grief yourself, but first of all, let me thank you for being here again and spending some time with us to talk about this very important subject right now, especially.
Yes, especially during the holidays.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. I, of course, love to be on the show. It's been a tough year for me.
Yeah.
So I'd like to start by reading a poem. This poem is called Grief by Matthew Dickman. And we'll probably need Kleenex for this. So I'll grab one now. When grief comes to you as a purple gorilla, you must count yourself lucky. You must offer her what's left of your dinner, the book you were trying to finish, you must put aside, and make her a place to sit at the foot of your bed. Her eyes moving from the clock to the television and back again. I am not afraid. She has been here before, and now I can recognize her gait as she approaches the house. Some nights when I know she's coming, I unlock the door, lie down on my back, and count her steps from the street to the porch. Tonight she brings a pencil and a ream of paper, tells me to write down everyone I have ever known. And we separate them between the living and the dead, so she can pick each name at random. I play her favorite Willie Nelson album because she misses Texas, but I don't ask why. She hums a little, the way my brother does when he gardens. We sit for an hour while she tells me how unreasonable I've been, crying in the checkout lane, refusing to eat, refusing to shower, all of the smoking and all of the drinking. Eventually, she puts one of her heavy purple arms around me, leans her head against mine, and all of a sudden, things are feeling romantic. So I tell her, things are feeling romantic. She pulls another name, this time from the dead. She turns to me in that way that parents do, so you feel embarrassed or ashamed or something. Romantic, she says, reading the name out loud slowly, so I am aware of each syllable, each vowel, wrapping around the bones like new muscle, the sound of that person's body, and how reckless it is. How careless that his name is in one pile and not the other. Okay, so
Okay.
I just love that poem because, first of all, it's crazily irrelevant or irreverent. Talking about purple gorillas, I mean, grief is a purple gorilla, right? That's not what you expect to see.
But you can visualize that purple gorilla sitting on the end of your bed.
Yes.
I did.
Yes. And the beauty of at the end, that what it really came down to is the two piles. And so yeah, this is my sister Rose. Rose is she was a year older than me, and that was, her and I were so tight when we were little. We had our own language. And she got cancer a few years ago and beat it, which was just an amazing accomplishment. She was cancer-free this year. And then she went to a conference and got Legionnaire's pneumonia, and it was like she went in the hospital on Tuesday and she was dead on Wednesday.
Oh, no.
And we had so many plans and things. And I know that this is, I mean, there's the rational part of me that says, you're in your 70s, we're going to die. It's not like this is anything that you didn't know was going to happen. But I've been talking about grief and teaching about grief for decades. And the experience of this, I think because as we age and we have so much more life experience and we have so many more we have so much more knowledge that things are felt differently. I feel like grief is being felt differently in my 70s than it ever was at any other time in my life. And and so I've been really struggling with the big questions. Where do we go after we die? What is after this? And I don't have any answers. I've never had any answers. But so I've been really looking at my own structure about grief and asking and kind of breaking that down. It's like, what is grief for? What is grief for? The purpose of grief. And so for years, it's always been the purpose of grief is to let go. The purpose of grief is that you let go of something which then creates space for something new. But today, when I was thinking about this, I also realized that the emotion of grief, which is so much a part of all of our lives, right? It is the expression of loss, and it doesn't necessarily mean the loss of someone or something. It could be the loss of something that you're missing. It could be something that's not in your life that you want. And I've realized that I've been grieving my entire life that I wasn't born in a world of magic. From the first time I started keeping a journal, I wrote how much I did not want to live in a world that didn't have magic in it. And so these big griefs that kind of come in and knock you out, of a loved one, your parent or your child or your partner. I think what that does is it shakes the foundation of what you believe, and it forces you to look at those big questions. What do I believe? Where will I go after I die? Is there something after I die? And if so, what would I like it to be? But also, what's missing in my life? Is there a possibility now that this grief I'm experiencing and moving through my body could open up a space for something that I didn't think I'd ever be able to have? So I'm asking myself, what would living in a world of magic look like? And could you create that for yourself?
I think you can.
How would you go about that?
Well, I believe in magic.
I do too. And this is the part we don't talk about. We rarely have these kinds of conversations, which is, if the world could be any way for you that you desired, what would that look like? And we don't talk about that. We don't ask that question often enough, I think. So for you, if living in a world of magic was possible, what would that look? Because I don't know how that would look.
Well, it all depends on how you define magic, I guess. I mean, is it going to be, your magic wand?
It's not Harry Potter.
Yeah, it's not Harry Potter.
It's definitely not Harry Potter.
But is living in joy magic?
Here's the world I'm missing. And this happened simultaneously when my sister died. I saw this article. I don't remember who the man was. If I remembered his name, you would know who I was talking about. He was some psychologist or something, and I think it was in the 50s or the 60s. He went to Africa to live with the Bushmen.
Okay, it wasn't Carl Jung or anything
Nope.
like that. Okay.
And they were stunned to learn that he couldn't hear the stars. And they thought he was sick. So they wanted to heal him, and they just couldn't believe. They kept coming to him and saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure you can't hear the stars?" And there was something in my body that just yearned for that. Like I would love to live in a world where I could feel the synchronicity of the magical commonwealth, right? Which is that the whole entire world is conscious and conspiring to bring you whatever it is that you desire. And it's not that I want everything that I desire. That's not it at all. It's that ability to feel the consciousness and to feel the magic of each individual thing out there as all part of a whole, but that, the trees are singing, the stars are talking, the water is, everything is communicating, and I'm deaf. And that is the ultimate grief that losing my sister brought me to, was that I feel like I'm deaf in a world of magic.
Okay, I got to ask you, could you hear these things hear and see before this grief?
I feel like I've lost my ability. When I was younger, I definitely could.
Because you can lose it.
Yes.
You can lose it. And a lot of the noise
I
that's
think-
around us day in and day out, and then you can add grief to it.
Yep.
But when I hear running water, I hear music. I hear music. I really do. And sometimes I'm laying in my bed and there's water going from somewhere. I don't know where the water's coming from, but I hear the music. I can still hear it. Trees talk to me and I talk to them. I mean, I do believe I live in a magical world, because I've managed to, when you can believe in it, maybe your heart got a little closed off to it because of the grief But you need to open that back up.
Yeah,
And listen again.
Yes, and that's one of the things I've noticed too, is that as I'm going through this grief process, which is very different from anything I've ever experienced, my body just wants to hide my heart. Yeah. So I'm constantly like having to put my shoulders back. And when I go to yoga and they give me, we get into these poses where you open your heart, it's like the emotion just floods my body, because my heart is like, no, I'm wounded. Leave me be.
Yeah.
So I do think that I've lost my ability, and I think part of that is that I'm not in the wilderness enough. When I sold my cabin, I no longer got to go someplace where there was no lights.
Yeah.
And I could see the Milky Way, and I could, and then I could sing. I could hear the stars. I laid out on the ground and watched the Northern Lights one night, and they were magnificent. The sound they made was so incredible. But that was decades ago. I haven't had my cabin since the early 2000s, maybe 2005, I think I sold it. So for almost 20 years. And now when I'm in Mexico, I rarely get out from wherever I'm staying. I rarely get out into the jungle where it's dark.
Yeah.
So I know, and I think that this is why our connection to nature is critical right now. It is absolutely critical right now that we find a way to reconnect with the secret commonwealth. That's what it's called, the secret commonwealth, because the secret commonwealth refers to a book that was written that talks about fairies and pixies and elves and those kinds of things. But the overall idea is that everything is alive, everything has consciousness, and everything is communicating with us constantly, and we cannot hear it because we are filled up with distraction. And when you live in the city, you've got lights. I miss darkness. It's one of those things I miss viscerally, is pure darkness.
Let me tell you, when I go up north to a friend's cabin and it's dark and I can see all the stars, I am in awe.
Yeah.
I just and she's like, oh, Stephanie, come on. It's like, it's because she gets to see it all the time.
Yeah, yes. And I
magic
worry
to me.
I worry about generations of children being brought up in the inner city and not ever having access. One of my favorite writers, Michael Ventura, he wrote a book of essays that's just quite amazing. And he talks about the first time, he grew up in New York City, and he talks about the first time that he was going someplace and he got a ride with this family, right, in a station wagon. It was 1970 something, 71 or something. And they're driving out of New York, and they're in upstate New York where it's completely dark. And the father stops the car, everybody piles out, and they're running around and looking at the stars and playing and laughing and stuff. He said he was so terrified he could not take his hand off the car because he had never been in darkness before. He had never seen the stars. And I just was so struck by that, and I thought about how many people who grow up in inner cities and never see true darkness, never really see the magnificence of the stars. When I was in my 30s, I would go to Big Bend, Texas. I'd take these trips, these vision quests, I called them, where I'd go off into the wilderness by myself, and I'd camp for a couple of weeks out. And it was so incredible. I don't think I could do that today, My body wouldn't be able to put up with it. I don't have the energy for that now. But there has to be some way. And I can't see, how do we get from here where we are to there where I want to be, which is that cities understand the importance of darkness. That even in a city, you have the opportunity to find darkness, to find quiet. There's a scientist who goes around and he measures. He's looking for the areas of pure silence, right, where it's just natural sound. And I think in the United States anyway, as I remember, there's only one place he was able to find where there was no ambient sound, or nothing, no unnatural sounds, sounds that were bleeding in from civilization. How sad is that?
Yeah.
So in some ways, we as a culture, we as a race are losing our secret commonwealth, our ability to connect with the living universe. And I feel like the violence that we're seeing, there's so much anger. There's so much anger now. And I think a lot of that is because we've lost that connection. And people, I see a lot of people saying, oh, well, it's because we've lost our connection to God. Well, if God is that thing that brings you that sort of awe, that, isn't the earth simply a creation of God? If that's, why wouldn't we revere that? Why do we treat it so poorly?
That's a good question.
And so, I don't know. I mean, I know we started this off talking about grief. So anyway, grief tells you that there's a loss, right? It's easy to say, oh, I lost my sister. But that wasn't really what it was about. It was like, I lost my magic. My sister's death took me to that place because I couldn't escape it. I couldn't, I realized that loss has been eating at me for 20 years since I lost my cabin or sold my cabin. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to get back to something like that because everything costs money in our culture. And it used to be that I could drive 20 minutes out of the city and find darkness. Very, very few places now that don't require at least a couple hours of driving.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have to have a place to stay, and then you have to, and I'm too old to sleep on the ground. I'm sorry. Those days are gone.
I was always too old to sleep on the ground.
Yeah, it's never been terribly comfortable, but it was always manageable. But not now. So I worry for us as a species. I worry for our ability that we can't hear the stars and we can't see the darkness.
Yeah, I hate to go down this rabbit hole, but it feels to me like there's a deliberate push to push that out of people, and that's what's coming in on us, and that's what's coming in on the young ones. And I think it's super important to be able to get them out of that trance, if you will, and let them understand that's not the way it has to be. Escape from that, and get out and find yourself.
See but the problem with that is that if that's just an isolated experience that they have once in a while, it means nothing. Children need to grow up in the country or in the darkness, in the secret commonwealth. They need to grow up listening to the trees and laying on top of a horse and having that empathetic, connection that horses give you, and and learning how the world speaks to them. And I think that when you grow up in a city and you get out occasionally, there's a few children who I think will always be so connected that you can't take that away from them. But they'll do poorly within the city. They will not thrive in that environment. They will want to be in a different environment. And once they get old enough, they'll probably make that choice for themselves. But what about, I just think about the generations. My own daughter, I remember the first time I took her swimming in a lake, and she was like, ew, things are alive in here. And I was like, that's it. And that's why I bought my cabin. Because I was like, you cannot grow up being upset about things that are alive in the water. Because that's living water. So then I took her to the cabin, and she had enough years of that when she went off to Pennsylvania, they used to go camping in the Poconos and things like that because, and she invested money in all of the gear and stuff like that so that she could go do that.
Yeah, back in the day we did that too. Like we had, tent it out. And,
Yep.
there was actually a big group of us that would do it almost every summer.
Yeah.
And we did it as kids. We'd go up to a cabin.
Yeah.
The family somehow had enough money. We never had a lot of money, but we always seemed to have enough money to do a annual trip up to some cabin somewhere and cook out and fish and swim in the lakes and things like that. I think because my aunt, mom, and I guess I'm not sure about my uncle, but they grew up on farms.
Yeah.
And they wanted us to experience that.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I had that luxury, but not every other kid does.
Yeah. Well, we were very poor, and we had 8 kids in my family, so. We went on one vacation once, and it was, in my opinion, it was a disaster. It was a disaster for me, for sure. But nonetheless, I actually grew up outside of the city. I grew up on the Mississippi River, so there was a lot of my siblings and I would go in the summertime. We were never in the house. We were always catching tadpoles and down on the river and stuff like that. So we had a different access. But there are so many people that have nothing like that. And so then what happens is, it makes me see the world in a whole different way, because I feel like then you have this competition for, the designer clothes or, the fancy car or whatever, because those things, that's the non-secret Commonwealth or the, whatever that is. It's a replacement for the juice that you get when you are in a natural setting. And we just keep killing more and more and more of the natural setting. It's so hard to find any place that has not been touched by mankind.
But there's still the magic there, even though it's been touched, even in my own backyard. The magic of one day in the fall, this few years back, but I was sitting on my deck and I was meditating, and I thought to myself, as the sun is moving, do the trees actually start to turn and move with it? Because the trees are always looking for the sun. And I tell you what, all of a sudden I heard a collective and I was just like, oh my God, I just witnessed that.
Yeah.
That was pure magic for me.
That's because you asked and they answered and you heard. You were listening for an answer. And it is that easy. It is that easy to connect with nature in that way. So my nature is big and dramatic. So of course I have this relationship with my land where, and the gardens and I'm creating this balanced ecosystem within my yard. And there's that part of me that wants, to go back to the desert and, lay under the stars, because that's big and dramatic and that's what feeds me. So that's been another thing about aging that's been interesting, is learning how to do things on a smaller scale. Like talk to the trees in my yard, talk to the environment in my yard, talk to the insects, talk to my plants and things like that, and listen and hear back from them.
It's good to talk to them.
It is.
They enjoy your CO2.
Yeah. Let's exchange
Have an
breath.
exchange program there.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is. It really is. So back to grief. I think that grieving, of course, is critical. It's a critical skill. And I thought when I went into this thing when my sister died, I was like, well, I know how to cry. I cry at the drop of a hat. Crying is easy for me. I don't have any trouble with it. It wasn't just the crying, though. I mean, I've had horrible body aches and, these sudden bouts of dropping to my knees with my head in my hands. And that's what made me go looking, what else is there? It's not just this one particular loss. And then shortly after she died, my daughter's father died of turbo cancer. And we had a couple of weeks, we had a month or two to say goodbye to him before he went. But it was back to back, those two things. And we had a great relationship. The three of us would go out for brunch every month or so. So that was a long, she was our only daughter. He
Yeah.
was my first lover. You know, we met very young. I had my daughter when I was 20. We didn't stay together. He married somebody else, but we stayed friends. And, you know, there was another loss right back to back.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm hoping that that truism about things coming in threes is not
Yeah.
is not going to happen.
Well, let's not put that out there. So just
Cancel clear.
Yep.
Cancel clear.
Cancel clear. Use your own term against
Yeah,
it.
exactly, exactly.
Cancel delete, I think it was.
So I wanted to. So the other one of the other things that grief does is that when you have a loss and you have grief, you also get to see the underlying structure around that loss. So, you know, how many times do people die and we have regrets? And how many times do people die and we don't have regrets, right? So regrets and non-regrets, those are kind of pictures of what the structure was underlying that relationship.
Yeah.
So that's another good thing, is to look at, you know, what am I regretting, or why am I regretting that? Or if I have no regrets, then the structure, you know, looks a certain way, and it's like, wow, that structure was really built on love, and that structure was really fed by love, and it was very strong. And that's, of course, why I'm feeling the loss of it so great. How can I put another structure in that is equally strong, you know? And that's been kind of hard for me too, because it's like, do I need to go out and find new people, or what do I do?
I'm going to recommend meditating on it and seeing what comes in, and just kind of being aware of what comes in and if it's viable, or, you know, because you can go through that process of take it in, assess it, chuck it if you don't
Yep.
need it, or, you know,
Yep.
or been there, done that. Okay, what's coming in next?
Well, these are all things that are just sort of moving through my consciousness at the moment. And whenever I go to the ancestor altar, so I went to the ancestor altar, of course, after my sister died. She was front and center, and she was very present at the beginning, and we talked a lot. I cried. I told her how much I missed her. And she said to me, "We've been together before, and we're going to be together again. You know that." And I said, "I know." But what the ancestor altar, what they told me, all of my ancestors told me recently, was, it's time to do another retreat. It's time for you to host another retreat.
I'm going to stop you right there, and we're going to keep that for part 2.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we are coming back for part 2 with this, but for now, I'm going to say thanks for keeping it real with real people. Me and Kat Thompson will be back for a part 2 on this, where we're going to talk about her retreat. So, thank you.